Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. If you find us today on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these conversations. And if you're on a podcast platform, please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. Today, we're having a new conversation, one about dementia. 80% of people over 55 are worried about getting Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. The good news is that half of all dementias are preventable. And my guest today wants us to know that we can start the process of protecting our brain as we age. My guest today is Dr. Mitch Clionsky. He's a board-certified neuropsychologist. He's a co-author of a book with his wife. The book is Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. Dr. Clionsky, thank you for being with me today.
Gina, it's a real pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. As I shared before we hit record, I just lost a family member to early onset dementia and Lewy body last week. And so it's on my mind. And when I said yes to you, she was the kind of the impetus for me to say yes. And I would love to know, why do you do this? Why are you passionate about these neuro issues like dementia and Alzheimer's?
I think there's several threads to that answer. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try to put them together because I've given a lot of thought to this. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons is that I find that the brain is fascinating and that more than just psychology. I spent the first 10 years of my career primarily doing clinical psychology, meet with people, evaluate them, do psychotherapy. And during this time, there was a maturation in the field of clinical neuropsychology. I also found it was really interesting. If I'd go to a party, people would say to me, "So what do you do?" I'd say, "Well, I'm a psychologist." They'd want to either tell me all their problems or they think I was reading their mind and they try to run away. If I told them I was a clinical neuropsychologist, they go, "Oh." And so they would have a different start to the conversation because they think, wow, that's a big word. It must mean a lot of things. Basically, what it means is we use different kinds of tests and interviews to find out how people are thinking, how they're paying attention, how they're able to learn and remember things, how they're able to solve problems. And these kinds of questions, these kind of test results, reflect on what's going on in their brain and oftentimes leads us to be able to make a really good diagnosis of what's going on. And then, even more importantly, to lead to interventions that can stop something that's going bad from getting worse, or in some cases, roll it back and make it better. So back in the mid-'80s, because I've been practicing for 45 years, I know it looks to your viewers like I'm maybe 30, but I'm really quite a bit older than that. I've been practicing now for 45 years. And about 10 years into my practice, I got really interested in this and had taken a bunch of trainings back when I was in graduate school. So it was very natural. I'd actually started first neuropsychological laboratory in Western Massachusetts. And I wanted to do more of this. I began to expand my practice to the point where over the course of these years, I've actually evaluated, it says 25,000 in my bio. It's actually more like 30,000 patients for different kinds of cognitive problems. Each day I go in and see people and have new and exciting things to think about. So one of the reasons why I'm passionate is because it's very fulfilling to me to understand how people tick and what I can do to help them to be better. It got really personal, though, back when I was 50 years old and my mom was in her early 70s. And I could put together the fact that some of the changes in who this very capable, competent, wonderful woman was, that she was having greater and greater difficulty. And I realized that she was developing dementia. Took her to a neurologist back where we grew up, where I grew up in Pennsylvania. She got a diagnosis, she got all the various memory tests, the neurological tests, And basically, I was on the other side of the table where my patients and their families sit for the next 10 to 12 years of her life. I conclude that it's much better to be on the professional side than on the patient side. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I thought at the time was, wasn't it wonderful that this gave me some compassion and insight into what's happening with these families that I might never have had before? It was also a real impetus to try to do something that would help to spare other people from what my mom went through and from what I went through as her son. So, along with my wife, Emily, who is a very brilliant psychiatrist who works mostly in the field of neurology, because they get double boarded in psychiatry and neurology. And she'd already been an internal medicine doctor. So she brought all this incredible medical knowledge to bear. We decided that it made a lot of sense for us to try to put this into a book so that people could read this book and make changes potentially in their medical conditions, in their habits and lifestyle, so they wouldn't have to go through this. And we were really bolstered by the fact that the research was incredibly supportive of the fact that half of these cases could be avoided. Most people don't know that. So that's what gets me here today.
It's really encouraging to know that there is something we can do, because it's very frightening. Mm-hmm. It's an unknown, and losing your mind is a scary thing. And to the story of my cousin, what it does to a person's personality and the dynamics within a family. And if it's a family caregiver, which in this case it was very difficult, very long and stressful journey for everyone. But you were sharing, because I was saying my uncle had Alzheimer's and then his daughter had this Lewy body dementia. You were saying it's not necessarily genetic. Is that correct?
In fact, few of the cases are actually genetic. Genes account for maybe about 5% of your risk. Isn't that amazing? Because most people, they say, oh, I had a mother, I had a father, maybe both of them, who had Alzheimer's disease. I will surely have this. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And we say, well, there are some blood tests that you can get that'll tell you if you have some of the genes or some of the findings early on that would predict this. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I'm not a big supporter of these blood tests, because you're going to want to do everything you can to prevent dementia, whether or not you have the genes. It's not like you're going to try harder if you have genetic background. You should be doing this anyway, because while the genes are typically ones predicting Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's is only one type of dementia. It's sort of like Ford is only one type of automobile. There's Toyotas, there's Chevrolets, there's lots of different types. Same thing is true in the field of dementia. Mm. Number one question people ask is it Alzheimer's or is it dementia? And the answer is often, well, it could be both, because Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, as is Lewy body disease, what you were talking about with your cousin. One of the biggest types of dementia, however, rivaling Alzheimer's and often in combination with Alzheimer's, is what we call vascular dementia. And so here's where all the things that affect your heart also affect your brain, because it's all connected by circulatory systems. So we see a lot of people who have histories of hypertension that they're not really controlling well, diabetes that they're not paying attention to and not doing the things to control that. We see that there's also dementias caused by repetitive brain injuries, what they call chronic traumatic encephalopathy, where people get their heads hit a bunch of times. It can be even just one time for that matter, but it's more often when it's a repetitive kind of pattern. Unfortunately, by the time they're adults, a lot of those kinds of damages have already been done. So we're not going to undo that or prevent that. We're going to work on everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol intoxication, excessive alcohol use is also a very common condition that leads to the loss of memory functioning and cognitive abilities, thinking abilities,
Mm-hmm.
as we age. And obesity, which is a huge epidemic in the United States, underpins the high blood pressure, it underpins the diabetes, it underpins the sedentary behavior of people who don't move enough, making them susceptible to dementia. So exercise is one of those commonalities that we're going to be talking about no matter what the diagnosis ultimately ends up being.
Mm.
Okay. One of the things that most people don't know, one of the preventable factors that's only been discovered in the last several years, is that hearing loss actually causes memory decline. So when people are beginning to turn up the volume on the TV, when they're not responding to what other people are saying as well as they used to, when they're missing out on background noise, that's actually depriving their brain of the stimulation it needs to be able to make connections. So it affects two parts. One is the surface of the brain, and the other is a network that's internal to our brain called the salience network. That's the connectivity of our brain that says, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's important. The good news is, in many cases, if you can get someone to have a hearing test and then to use hearing aids, which these days are becoming better and better and cheaper, you can improve their ability to think in the short term. Actually, their scores on testing will improve, and you can help prevent decline as they age. The hard part is getting people to recognize it, to get past their resistances. And they say, oh, my husband's mumbling, or it's just that I wasn't thinking so well. I was thinking about something else. And the best advice is, well, why don't you get your hearing tested? Then we'll know for sure, and you can make good decisions going forward.
I have a question about, so one of my dearest friends, her father went in for heart surgery. I guess he'd been having some minor memory issues, but when he came out of surgery, something about the anesthesia just threw him into full-blown dementia, and he was also diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. What was the correlation there? Is that common? Is it kind of an unusual situation?
Yes, it is common, but it's probably not so much the anesthesia as it is the oxygen. So we've known for a long time that people who've had multi-vessel surgeries, bypass surgeries, have emerged from surgery with difficulty thinking. Sometimes it's early onset and it seems to get better. And the other group seems to get it about 5 years later. They used to think that it was because people were not on a heart-lung machine getting enough oxygen during that time. More recent studies found those are probably equivalent whether they're on or off that pump, and now think it may have to do partially with little tiny pieces of plaque being broken off when they reconnect the vessels.
Yeah.
But there's another explanation for it that I think is oftentimes the case. And it doesn't just occur with heart surgery. It also occurs with knees and hip replacement, which I'm sure many of your listeners are either contemplating or have had. And that is if you happen to have obstructive sleep apnea. In other words, if you are stopping breathing or your oxygen level drops by 4% while you're sleeping, this occurs more than on average 5 times per hour. That's what the definition of sleep apnea is. If you have this and either you don't know it or the surgeon doesn't put you on a CPAP machine when you come out of surgery and they remove that breathing tube, they extubate you, you can have a sudden loss of oxygen that'll really mess with your brain, will cause you to end up, in some cases, in intensive care, thinking there's spiders coming down from the walls, essentially delirious. And if you already are having some problems with your thinking abilities, if you're beginning to have some changes that are the precursors for dementia, this is like throwing fuel on a fire. It can make people much worse in a very short period of time. So I guess the takeaway is, if you have symptoms of sleep apnea, or even are concerned about it, you ought to get tested for it. Because we now know that the most recent research is if you're mid-50s or older, there's actually a 50% chance you have this. You don't have to be fat. You don't have to be male. You don't have to snore loudly. You can still have this. And it's very, very treatable. So you ought to get it treated. If I ruled the world, everybody starting at age 50 would begin to get this kind of a test in addition to their colonoscopies, in addition to their mammograms every 5 years, simply because if we identify and treat this condition, we can avoid a lot of problems, heart attacks, strokes, dementia down the road. But anyway, if you're having a diagnosis, if you already know you've got sleep apnea, you should treat it using continuous positive airway pressure, otherwise known as CPAP. But even if you're one of those people who says, oh, I'm never going to use that machine, I don't want a CPAP, tell your surgeon, if you're going in for surgery, that you have sleep apnea, so at least they can put a CPAP on you when you're coming out of surgery.
Okay, fantastic. Now, you talk about ways that we can prevent or protect our brains. What are some of the ways that my audience can themselves protect their brains, or even help their parents? Because a lot of us really are responsible for our parents in this season of life, myself included. So what are some of the things that we can do for that preventative measure?
So our model that we build on in the book takes about 8 chapters to build this entire model. Has a variety of different types. So let me tackle a few of these. For many people, the biggest ones are the cardiovascular conditions. There's a cluster of them. And most of them have lack of exercise and obesity at their core. So your body was built to carry a certain weight. I'm not trying to shame anybody. I'm not trying to talk about appearance. I'm talking about what your body was designed based on your height and your bone structure. If you exceed that, you're going to have changes simply because in your body and in your health, simply because your body is working too hard for its structure. If you view it in that kind of a term, you say, it's really important then that I do everything I can so that it fits my body and what I'm made for. And that's really, I think, a much more positive way of approaching this, because it gets away from the stigma. It gets away from the, are you being lazy? Are you not taking care of yourself? It really says, okay, here I am at 50. How do I want to be for the next 30 years of my life? Well, part of me wants to be more fit. So I got to exercise on a regular basis, number one, because there really isn't an alternative to that works. The question is how to get ourselves to start. That, for most people, is the issue.
Yes.
And as I like to tell people, the first step in changing a habit, like exercise, is you have to examine your butt. And they look at me like you're looking right now saying, what?
I think you mean B-U-T.
That's exactly what I mean. Not the one you're sitting on, but the butt that's in the sentence. I would exercise butt. Whatever comes after that is what you have to examine. And oftentimes it's things like, well, I'm lazy. What does that mean? That means I'm not doing it. That's just a rationalization. It means I'm too busy. Really? It means I can't do it for this reason or that reason. I'd have to do this first. I had a lady who told me that the reason she hadn't done much exercise the past year was she was still working on the apartment she moved into, and they were supposed to replace the windows and they hadn't done it. And she needs to get her drapes done first. I said, what does that have to do with your exercise? So after we work on that, the question is, here's a formula that I recommend people use because this gets around most of everyone's butt. The first thing is take a 10-minute walk. Do it 3 times a day. Here's why this 10-by-3 formula works. Number 1, walking is great exercise. Number 2, you're unlikely to hurt yourself. It's unlikely you're going to get lost. You can do it most everywhere. Yeah. You can do it in most every kind of weather. The exercise, those 10-minute walks are cumulative. So the 3 10-minute walks gives you 210 minutes of exercise a week, right in the sweet spot for all of the medical societies. And if you're walking briskly, which means you're getting your heart rate up, but you're still able to talk, you're going to get about 9 or 10 miles of exercise, which is great. The question then is, what do you do while you're walking? Partly, you can listen to a podcast like this. It's always a good idea. Listen to music. You can talk to a friend or relative that you've been meaning to stay in touch with. In fact, both of you can be walking at the same time, which is a lot of fun. Different places, same walk. And you don't need special equipment. You need a nice pair of shoes, and that's about it. So if we get people to start at that point, for many of them, that will be enough. But it also gives a springboard for people who want to do more, who want to augment it with a hike on the weekends when they have more time, who want to also mix in some bicycling or some other kind of exercise. So anyways, when you have the exercise pieces I was talking about, that helps with the weight gain, which helps to keep your blood pressure down, which helps to keep your blood sugars below the level of diabetes. And by the way, even pre-diabetes is not good. That will elevate your risk of dementia, which means that if your A1C, your hemoglobin A1C is in the 6s, but not at 7, that's still an increased risk. It's like a 50% increased risk, whereas you have a twice as high increased risk if you actually have diagnosed diabetes with an A1C of 7 or higher. Most people don't have A1Cs below 6, but they should. Okay. Smoking factors into that as well. I have one word to say about smoking. Don't. Yeah. It's involved with all kinds of different vascular problems, which ultimately are going to affect your brain. And also, all these cardiovascular factors are very often involved with the sleep apnea and sleep piece. So if we take a look at all of those things, you come to the conclusion of, wow, there's a lot of them, but also that they're all intertwined. And if you're not doing anything about them, they feed on each other. They actually create a vicious cycle of decline. That's not good. But the good news is, if you begin to change one of those, you now are turning the vicious cycle in reverse. So if you're exercising, it's easier to lose weight. You're getting more oxygen to your brain. You're oftentimes sleeping better because you're more tired when you go to bed. Your blood pressure is more controlled. See, all these things work together in your benefit. And that's really what you want to do, is get that cycle going in the positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that you brought up the smoking for the vascular. My mom smoked for 40 years, and we're going through the vascular issues now for her. But my uncle, who had the dementia, and his daughter were both morbidly obese, and he had diabetes. It's it's one of those things where when we think about our bodies, it's all interconnected. I mean, I think we know that, but when we go to a doctor, say we go for our eyes, we go for our brain, we go for our arm, we go for our stomach, and everything's segmented. And I think that helps us forget that nothing is nothing is an island in our body. Everything affects everything else. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like we forget because when we go to the doctor, they're like, I can't talk about that because that's not my specialty. And we tend to think of ourselves in pieces and parts. And what I hear you saying is everything leads to something in our body. So we find that maybe the core thing that stands out right now, whether it's the breathing or the diabetes, and do something to begin to positively impact that. And you will get a domino effect. It will begin to turn your ship around. Maybe there's more you can do, but it starts. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. Let me expand on that a little bit because you've hit a really central point, both to what's going on with dementia and why we wrote our book the way we did. Typically, people focus on one thing. Mm-hmm. I always get asked, so doctor, what's the one thing you can do to reduce your risk of dementia? To which, tongue-in-cheek, I respond, read our book, Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. Because it isn't a particular food or type of diet. It isn't a particular brain game. It isn't a particular thing. It's from all of these different areas. So when we decided to write this book, the first rule we had was it had to be scientifically valid. We needed to use only what has really been proven as rock solid science. And then we thought, well, but we can't do this from just neurology. It has to also involve psychiatry and psychology, but also cardiology, endocrinology, which is where the diabetes doctors are. There's ophthalmological parts of this. Your eyes are also involved in this process. Hearing doctors. We had to really scour the literature for all of these different areas. And one of the things that I realized was there aren't any dementiologists. Think about that. We've got gastroenterologists. They deal with our gut. We've got gynecologists. We've got urologists. We've got neurologists. We've got all these ologists. We don't have any dementiologists who pull all of this together. That was our goal. Pull all of it together, translate hard science into understandable language. Because if you don't understand it, you can't use it. So I'm always really happy when people say, I read your book, and wow, it was really understandable. I didn't think I'd be able to get it. And I tell them, well, the book is written, so it sounds like you're sitting in the same room with us, having a conversation, like a podcast.
Yeah.
And if it's understandable to you, then you're going to be motivated to do something about it, including assessing your own strengths and weaknesses and making changes that make a difference. So that's why this whole idea about looking at this very wide net of information is really critical. And you've identified the issue as well as anyone I've seen so far in terms of saying, yeah, it's not dementia prevention is a thing, but it's not one thing. It's all of this.
It's a lifestyle shift. It's what it sounds like.
And sort of recreating ourselves or adapting. One of the real challenges at any point in life, but particularly in midlife and beyond, is taking inventory and saying, okay, what do I want now? Because chances are, if I've hit 50, I'm likely to be around for at least the next 30 years. When you turn 70, your lifespan is now 85 because you've now made it past some of those things that'll kill you in your 50s and 60s. But at each point along that continuum, what you should be looking at is, okay, what do I want to do with this next period of time? How do I want to keep myself healthy? How can I wake up dead one morning without being sick the day before? That's my goal. How can I accomplish that? And the rule is, if you pay attention to your health, a lot of these things are very doable, including the keeping your brain intact throughout that period of your life.
Do you have a series of brain exercises that people can do? Like you said, to me, in my mind, it's like if your hearing is bad, but you get your hearing back up, then your brain can activate properly. Do you have things that maybe we've gotten into habits of doing as a society, not even just by age, that are kind of steering us toward less healthy futures as far as dementia is concerned. Things like screen time or lack of activity, or like you said, the sedentary, which is the lack of activity. Are there things that the little shifts, like you said, a 10-minute walk 3 times a day, that's super fantastic. Does hydration come into play? Are there certain vitamins or minerals that can help us, you know, support our system so that they can do what they need to do from your standpoint?
Important questions. Number one, vitamins and minerals are important if you have a deficiency.
Okay.
But if you don't have a deficiency, you're basically using your body as a way of turning them from a pill into byproducts from the toilet.
Okay.
So, but if you want to pay a lot of money and have it flow through your body to do that in hopes that it'll make a difference, be my guest. But, as I tell people, if you can hear me if you can hear someone in the next state screaming at the TV, that may be me when I'm watching commercials for some of the products that tout their advantages for brain health or just for general vitality. And they've crammed vegetables and fruits into little tiny pills.
Yeah.
And people say, well, I don't have the time to eat regularly. Well, I'm sorry. Make the time to do that. This is a really stupid way of going about it. So, no, there really aren't any particular vitamins or minerals. There's recent research suggesting a multivitamin could have some benefit. Mm-hmm. The research was not really well designed, I have to tell you. The evidence that they used to make this statement is relatively weak, but it's not a bad thing. You want to take a multivitamin, go ahead. But I see people walk into my office with bags of supplements and vitamins that they're spending a lot of money for and getting nothing from. Number one, oftentimes these are so poorly regulated that you don't even know which brand has what in it. Number two, in most cases, it never can reach a blood level sufficient in your body to even affect your brain. So it's getting digested along with food that you're eating. So save your money on those kinds of things, and especially the one with the jellyfish products. That is worthless. The other issues have to do with brain games. Really mixed data on the efficacy of specific games for improving thinking abilities. There's some research that says for certain people, certain games might help with problem solving, and other games might help with attention. The evidence is not strong enough for me to even put in a brain training office in my suite of offices or hire someone to teach people how to use these. Believe me, I've looked for this for years because I thought, wow, this would be a great non-pharmaceutical way of helping out my patients and growing my practice. And after looking at the research, I keep coming up saying, there's nothing here. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be active. I really want people to be active in several ways. First of all, the physical we talked about. But second, I want them to be interpersonally active because it does show from the research that support systems, friendships, partnerships, doing things with other people is really important in maintaining our outlook, but also our brain health. So if you have a choice between doing a word search puzzle in your house or going out someplace and playing bridge, pinochle, mahjong, board games with friends, do the one that gets you out. You're going to use much more of your brain. We also know that for a lot of people, retirement isn't so wonderful from a cognitive perspective. They can't wait to retire from their job. And then they haven't made a plan about what to do after retirement. So 3 weeks into it and sleeping late, they're looking around saying, what now? And we say, okay, there's lots of opportunities. You can try to get a part-time job. You can take up some new hobbies. You can do some volunteer work, but you got to do something. You don't want to rust out. You could wear out. That's not too bad, but you don't want to rust out. So you need to put some real hard energy. And frankly, what we should be doing before we get to retirement is have classes for retirement planning. Mm-hmm. You know, all the pre-retirement planning is based on finances. Do you have enough to retire? Great. But what are you going to do with that money once you retire becomes the important question.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really grateful for this conversation because, you know, the thing about fear is it overwhelms us. And then we're not able to see possibility. We're not able to see answers because the fear becomes the all-consuming thing. And right now, at least what I'm seeing is there's a lot of conversation around dementia and Alzheimer's, but it tends to come from a scary place. Mm-hmm. It tends to feel scary, be couched scary. And then, you know, people start to go, well, my dad had it, I'm going to have it. Or, sugar, all of these things come up and all of it figures in. But I'm grateful for this conversation because to me, the fear is being pulled back and the truth and the reality and the possibility of us being able to contribute to the outcome instead of it just being like, well, there's nothing we can do. Do you know what I mean? And I appreciate that because it's a real concern. I'm interested in, it seems like there's an uptick, or is it just because it hasn't been focused on before? Like, is it really something that's becoming epidemic with hand quotes, or is it just something that's becoming a conversation?
It's, I think, a couple different reasons. Number one is the conversation. People are being willing to talk about this a lot more than they used to. It's really, we've shined a light on it, especially Alzheimer's disease and also frontotemporal dementia, which is what Bruce Willis has.
Is that aphasia?
Well, aphasia can be a part of it. Also, okay. Behavioral changes are a big part for many people in frontotemporal dementia. Okay. It actually is a type of dementia that occurs usually at an earlier age, usually in someone's 50s. So people are coming out of the closet. They talk about celebrities who have Alzheimer's disease, who have vascular dementia, et cetera, et cetera. So that's great. The other thing that is important to know is that dementia is usually a disease of aging. So when we're in our 60s, the risk is about 10%. Get into our mid-70s, it doubles to about 20%. Get into our mid-80s, and it doubles again. So if you're 85 years old, you have about a 40% chance. Mm-hmm. People are living longer. And therefore, and the people who are living longer are also very much baby boomers. We're moving into that era. And so there's this big hump in the population because baby boomers were the largest segment of the population. And I think they still may be. So now they're in their retirement years. So there's a lot more evidence. And a lot of the baby boomers, including myself, are saying, hey, no, we won't go. We won't go into this dark night. We're going to push back. We're going to fight this thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to use what we can to make a difference in our lives. Because, being older isn't what it used to be when our parents were older or our grandparents were older.
Yeah. And I think that's encouraging too. If you had to give 3 key takeaways to my audience, I'm going to assume and take this one from you that one of your key takeaways would be to get a hold of the book, Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. I know that was one of yours. So I would like 3 other ones from you in addition to getting a copy of the book.
Well, allied with that, if you go to our website called braindoc.com, there is a free downloadable dementia risk inventory, dementia prevention checklist that everyone can fill out that'll show them where they are in relation to where they should be in terms of being on target. And the beauty of this is it allows you to develop a plan. So we like to give that away because, I mean, you can look at other things on the website for sure. But if you simply take this questionnaire, which is the only one that I know of that actually is out there, you'll be able to assess your own risk and, more importantly, say, oh, I didn't realize I was off target on this. I didn't realize that was an important factor. I can work on that. So that's more important than any one particular piece of information. So that would be number one. Number two, there's also linked to that what's called a cholinergic or anticholinergic risk or anticholinergic burden, anticholinergic burden calculator. And the reason for this, so we didn't develop this calculator. It's a couple of doctors in England who developed this calculator. But many of us take medications, both prescription and over-the-counter, that contain chemicals, including one very common one called Benadryl or diphenhydramine, that depletes our brain of acetylcholine. Now, all of the memory medications we've had out, or actually most of 3 out of the 4 that we've had out since the 1990s, are aimed at trying to preserve acetylcholine. So we may be inadvertently depleting our brains of a chemical that we need. Very common in over-the-counter sleep aids.
Okay.
All the ones with the PM at the end of it. Very common in medications we take for allergies and flu symptoms. You also find these in medications for urinary control. So the ditropans, the detrols, brand names for things like oxybutynin, can contain these, as well as some prescription medications for your heart or for your mood. So the beauty of this calculator is you get to put in each of the things just from your medicine cabinet, and it'll calculate whether or not your levels are too high or not. And then you can begin to make some changes in what you buy over the counter. But if you're concerned about the prescriptions, do not stop them on your own. Go to your doctor and talk about them. Probably the other thing is that if you drink alcohol, measure what you're drinking. I see people all the time and say, oh, I only have 2 drinks a day. And I ask them, well, how do you pour them? They said, what do you mean? I just pour them into the glass. I said, you pour like your neuropsychologist pours. I said, what you should be doing here is using a shot glass, because I want you to do an experiment and go and pour using a shot glass. See if that's the amount you're actually drinking, because it isn't. But they tell themselves, well, it's just 3 fingers. Well, what does that mean? I don't go by fingers, I go by ounces. There's also, and people say, well, I only drink beer. Fine, but 1 beer equals a glass of wine equals a shot of bourbon. So it's not just beer, it's an alcoholic beverage that's diluted with water. So those 12 ounces at 4% alcohol are about the same as 50% alcohol of a shot of whiskey. So you have to do the calculations and watch what you drink, watch what you're taking that appears to be benign, because after all, it's sold without a prescription. And those are things we haven't touched on, but they really are important.
Well, obviously, I think this conversation could continue, because this is really a deep and wide conversation, but that's the benefit of having a resource like your book and your website. This is to, I think, pique the interest and the information kind of ears of people to say, he said that thing, or, oh, that sounds interesting to me. And you have the resources. So where can people find your resources again, so that we can direct them there?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Johns Hopkins is the publisher, so it's available through them. It's on Kindle, it's on Apple, it's on audiobook, which is really wonderful for people who like to listen to something in the car or while they're taking a walk. The website is BrainDoc, BrainDoc, braindoc.com, and it'll link you with all kinds of different resources, including the book and including other articles we've written, other podcasts. There's a wealth of knowledge, which we just want to give away. We just want people to have this. And by the way, our book's also in a bunch of libraries. So if you're saying, I can't afford the book, great, borrow it from your library.
And you can request it from your library. For those of you who don't know, if it's not in your library, speak to the librarian and see if you can get a copy that way. So that's a library hack.
And it works.
Yes, it totally works. Well, Dr. Clionsky, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I realize it was just a drop in the bucket, but I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to open up this conversation and to lift the fear a little bit. I appreciate the direct way that you communicated, the clarity with which you communicated, the practical ways that you communicated this issue, because it is something that is coming to the surface more and more. And fear comes with lack of knowledge. So thank you for bringing that knowledge to the plate today so that we can help quell the fear and take control of our health and our brain health and our life so that we can go into our future not fearful, but in control of potentially our brain health and our, just the outcomes, being more in our hands and less feeling like we're just going to be a victim of whatever it is that happens to us. So I appreciate your wealth of knowledge and the confidence and clarity that you delivered it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
It has been fantastic. And today, friends, if this is a conversation that really rings a bell for you, or someone who needs this information, I would like you to head to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 363. Or if you're on YouTube, just look down below. I will have the links for the doctor there and his book. Everything will be easily accessible for you. We don't have to be afraid. That's the key part of this conversation. Fear does not have to drive us into our future of aging. We do not have to, air quote, decline. We can choose to pursue life along our age timeline with an empowerment, with an education, with the choices that we make. To Dr. Mitch's point, retirement. What does retirement look like for us? We can really curate the life we want to live. We are not victims of the timeline. We can choose the way we live our lives, the way we think, the way we feed our bodies, the way we move our bodies, the way we communicate in and around us with the people in our lives. There's so many elements. I want to go down a bunny trail right now, but what I'm going to say is, don't be afraid of aging. Take the resources like Dr. Mitch and his wife and learn what you need to learn, change what you need to change, and live a healthy, vibrant life and share these resources with those in your world. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, conversations, and resources with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.